They said I was too sensitive, too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too much, not enough. And over time, I believed them. This is a story shared by millions, a story of growing up under constant judgment. A story not about trauma in the obvious sense, but about something more subtle, more corrosive, the slow erosion of self-worth that comes from never feeling truly accepted for who you are. To understand the scars we carry, we have to go back to the beginning, to childhood. A time when our minds were open, our identities unformed, and our deepest need was simple: to be seen, heard, and accepted. Judgment can take many forms. Some of it is overt. Why can't you be more like your brother? Stop crying, it's not a big deal. And some is subtle. A sigh, a disapproving glance, a lack of encouragement when we need it most. When children are young, they're not capable of abstract thinking. They don't have the skills to distinguish between subjective opinion and universal truth. When they hear you're not good enough over and over again, they don't know it's a reflection of the judgment of the adult. It becomes internalized as, I am not good enough. This is where the harm begins. The process of introjection, when children absorb others' opinions about them as if they are their own truth. When you are small and vulnerable, everything said to you carries immense weight. A comment from a parent, a teacher, a peer, it's all interpreted as a reflection of your value. And when the message is consistently negative, it gets written into the deepest layers of your identity. Children do not question the judgments they receive. Their sense of self is still being formed. Their identities are malleable, like clay, and the impressions made on them by the people around them will leave permanent marks. What's worse, these impressions often come from those who are supposed to love and protect them. Parents, teachers, mentors, people in positions of authority. However, it's not only verbal judgment that leaves scars, there's also the lack of judgment, or more accurately, the lack of positive reinforcement. How many children grow up feeling invisible, as if their achievements, their progress, their very existence are met with silence? This too is a form of judgment, one that communicates that they are not worthy of attention, of love, of encouragement. Now that we've explored the roots of judgment, we need to dive deeper into the psychological impact. These early experiences don't just affect how we feel about ourselves, they literally shape the way our brains are wired. When a child receives judgment, particularly when it's repeated and harsh, their brain responds in a number of ways. For one, the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for processing emotions, particularly fear, activates. This triggers a fight or flight response. The child's body goes into a heightened state of alert, where every interaction becomes a potential threat. And because children are highly impressionable, the emotional experience of judgment becomes ingrained. The brain forms neural pathways that associate judgment with danger, rejection, and pain. Over time, these pathways reinforce the child's belief that they are unworthy of love, that they will always be judged, and that they must be constantly vigilant. Psychologists call this introjection. The internalization of others' opinions creates an inner critic, the voice in your head that constantly tells you that you're not good enough. This inner critic becomes so entrenched that as adults, it becomes almost impossible to distinguish it from your own true voice. Over time, these judgments don't just stay as fleeting thoughts, they become self-schemas, a mental framework that shapes how you see yourself and interact with the world. A self-schema shaped by harsh judgment often leads to chronic self-doubt, perfectionism, and a deep fear of failure. Self-worth becomes tied not to inherent qualities or values, but to performance and approval. You start believing that your worth can only be proven through achievements, by meeting others' expectations. This can make even the smallest mistakes feel catastrophic, And because you're afraid of being judged, you start hiding parts of yourself. Growing up under judgment doesn't just affect how we think, it changes how we feel, how we connect, and how we cope. Children who are judged often develop deep shame, not guilt, which is about actions, but shame, which is about identity. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. And shame is like a poison. It seeps into every relationship, every opportunity, every dream, telling us we're unworthy before we even begin. Many of these judgments come from our primary caregivers, parents, relatives, teachers. The very people who were supposed to nurture our identity become the ones who mold it with conditions. This creates what psychologist Carl Rogers called conditions of worth, the idea that we're only lovable when we act a certain way. This leads to conditional self-acceptance. I am only okay when I'm achieving, when I'm quiet, when I'm helpful. The result? We lose touch with who we really are. Our true self gets buried beneath layers of performance, pretense, and protection. Social anxiety is one of the most common emotional consequences of growing up under judgment. When a child is constantly criticized or made to feel less than, it leaves a lasting fear of being judged by others, especially in social situations. This fear of judgment often evolves into an intense fear of social rejection, leading to chronic social anxiety. As children, we look to the adults around us to teach us how to navigate the social world. But when those adults are critical, dismissive, or emotionally distant, the child learns to fear judgment from everyone. They begin to overanalyze every interaction, trying to read other people's thoughts and anticipate how they are being perceived. This chronic self-monitoring and self-doubt lead to an overwhelming sense of discomfort in social situations. People with social anxiety often avoid social gatherings, public speaking, or situations where they might be judged. They may even isolate themselves to avoid the pain of rejection or criticism. Unfortunately, this avoidance reinforces the fear. The more you stay away from social situations, the more you convince yourself that they're dangerous, that you're unworthy of connection, that your worst fears will come true. The need to hide or suppress emotions is another common result of growing up under judgment. If children are taught that showing emotion is a sign of weakness, that being vulnerable will lead to rejection, they often learn to numb their feelings. This emotional suppression doesn't just affect how we relate to others, it can also impact our relationship with ourselves. By pushing their emotions down, they disconnect from their true feelings. This emotional numbness becomes a protective mechanism, but it ultimately leads to a loss of emotional richness. Without the ability to feel and express emotions fully, people become disconnected from their joy, sadness, and even love. This numbness may show up as depression, a constant feeling of emptiness, or a sense of being emotionally distant from others. The person may go through life in a robotic state, going through the motions but never feeling fully alive. This disconnect between body and emotion becomes another layer of the scars left by judgment. The child who was judged grows into the adult who doubts themselves, who overthinks every interaction, who needs reassurance constantly, who panics at criticism, even if it's gentle. They may become high achievers who burn out, or underachievers who never try. They may seek approval in every relationship, or isolate themselves to avoid being hurt again. No matter how they adapt, the wound is the same. I am not okay as I am. But there is hope. The brain and the self are not fixed. They are plastic. They can change. Healing begins when we become aware of the judgment we internalized and question it. Where did this voice come from? Is it true? Would I say this to a child I love? We begin to replace the inner critic with an inner nurturer, a voice that says, you're allowed to make mistakes. You don't have to be perfect. You are enough. As you are. As you begin to heal from the wounds of judgment, One of the most important steps is building healthier relationships, relationships that allow you to show up as your true self without fear of judgment or rejection. Growing up under judgment often leads to trust issues. You may have been conditioned to hide parts of yourself to avoid criticism or rejection. It's not easy to open up and be vulnerable when you've spent your life concealing your true identity. But healthy relationships are built on vulnerability. The people you surround yourself with should offer you a space to be imperfect, to be authentic, and to express your true feelings without fear of being criticized or judged. This may mean setting boundaries with people who are still toxic or judgmental. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is letting go of relationships that continue to perpetuate those judgmental patterns. It's okay to distance yourself from people who don't honor your worth. As you find people who love and accept you for who you are, you begin to rebuild your sense of self. You learn that it's safe to be seen, to be vulnerable, and that judgment doesn't define your worth. Over time, you begin to rewire your attachment style. If you struggled with anxious attachment, you may begin to feel more secure in your relationships, knowing that you can trust others and that love doesn't depend on perfection. If you've avoided emotional intimacy, you might start to open up and let others in, realizing that vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. Ultimately, the goal of healing from the scars of judgment is to reclaim your authentic self, the person who you were always meant to be before judgment, criticism, and fear shaped your identity. Embracing your authentic self requires letting go of the need to seek approval from others. It's about finding peace in who you are, regardless of what anyone else thinks. You are enough as you are, and you always have been. Your true self is not defined by the judgments of others, nor is it dependent on your achievements or the expectations placed on you. It's about learning to love and accept yourself, flaws and all. When you start living authentically, you stop looking for external validation. You stop worrying about what others think, and instead you focus on being true to yourself. This freedom is liberating. It's the first step toward truly healing from the scars of judgment. You may carry the scars of judgment from your childhood, but you do not have to let them define you. The journey toward healing is long, but every step forward is a step toward freedom. You are worthy of love, of acceptance, and of peace. Remember, the judgments of others are not your truth. You are enough, and your story is only beginning.